about 2 years into my career at the military, I became engaged to my first wife, who thought that I was this wonderful Christian man that was living for the Lord, doing things God's way, but in reality I was drinking, heavily drinking. I got out of the service in 1964. We got married, had a son 2 years later, and 5 years later after that adopted my younger son. And my drinking became the focal point of my activities. I wasn't home much. When I was home, often I'd been drinking before I got there. Probably wasn't very pleasant to be around.
The relationship between my parents wasn't necessarily the best. And my mom would describe it, the way she said it when my mom and dad divorced when I was in 7th grade was, we'd be laughing and joking and playing games, and your father'd walk in the house and everything would stop. And all the joy would go right out of the room.
Ultimately, she'd had enough of my nonsense and filed for a divorce. And not too long after the divorce, about a year or so after the divorce, she remarried and moved to Washington State, which made it difficult for communication with the boys. About a year after that, my youngest son, I got a letter from an attorney that he decided he didn't want to be my son anymore. He wanted to be adopted by his stepfather.
I reached a point in, probably about 14 or 15, where I didn't have any respect for him. I could see what was happening in his life and what he was doing. I was like, all right, nice enough guy to visit, but I've got no respect for him at all.
And I read the letter, and I was devastated by the idea of that he didn't want to be my kid anymore. And so I'd remarried myself at that point. My wife came home to find me sitting on the front porch, tears running down my cheeks, going, what's the matter? And I said, Sean wants to be adopted by Herman. He doesn't want to be my son anymore. Tried to commit suicide at one point, in an alcohol-induced depression that was getting to the point where I had to do something, and that was the only thing I knew to do.
We were in a basketball tournament in Las Vegas just before Christmas. So when my dad retired to Lake Havasu, often it became a tradition that he would come up for a day and visit, maybe come to a couple of the games. We go out for dinner or something. And so we're sitting there one night, and a waitress asked him if he wants a beer. And he said, no, I'm an alcoholic. And that was kind of a surprise. At one point, he laid it out. He says, I'm an alcoholic. And that's a lot of the reason that things have gone, that I did some of the things that I did. And that he wasn't there and wasn't involved. And so that's the point where he kind of asked for forgiveness. And I don't remember words per se, but within that discussion, it opened the way. And to be able to say, yeah, okay, it's all right, and thank you.
Well, it's been about 4 years ago, I guess, with doing the inventory through Celebrate Recovery. I called Butch and said, I need to talk to Sean. Can you set that up? I need to tell him I'm sorry. And through his efforts to set up a golf match, I had an opportunity to sit down and talk to Sean. And I told him, I says, hey, I'm sorry about what happened. It wasn't your fault. You didn't have anything to do with this. It was me. It was my alcohol addiction that was causing the issues. And I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. And, I'd like to be able to have told your mother that at one point too, but she had passed away a year or two before that. And there was this silence for 4 or 5 years, it seemed like, which was probably 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And he turned and looked at me, and he stuck his hand out, shook my hand, and says, it's okay, I understand. And
we wouldn't have a healthy relationship if it weren't for forgiveness. If we were going to harp on past wrongs and dwell in the past, we wouldn't get along very well. And so forgiveness is central, because without it, we wouldn't have much.
I think a lot of it has to do with God's grace again. If it weren't for God's grace and God's forgiveness, I probably wouldn't have sought forgiveness. And if it weren't for God's grace and God's forgiveness, he probably wouldn't have offered it.
Yeah, 20, 30, 40 years of affliction. But clearly that's being used. And that, for a son is a pretty neat thing. So
I'm indeed blessed. Indeed.
And this is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your